before. So what could happen is that the controlling parent might start a little bit further down the hierarchy, especially at the reception level, where receptionists may not be as well trained as head parents and more senior teachers, may not have seen this sort of stuff before, and they may not actually be involved in everyday long interactions with children, so they don't understand that there's an administrative role rather than a child face-to-face kind of role. And what can happen is that although they're in the administrative side, that actually gives the controlling parent an immense opportunity to cut out the targeted parent from being involved with the school. Because if you can hit the school at the administrative level with somebody who's not trained and not often around children, not seen this kind of problem before, that is a key vulnerability in the school where processes can be manipulated against the other parent quite naively. And sometimes they actually, school receptionist staff can be asked to do things that they actually feel are the right things to do, but actually are undermining the school's obligations to ensure that both parents are involved in the upbringing of the children, and actually these moves against the targeted parent can be very detrimental to the mental health of the children and actually worsen the position that they're in, worsen the disorders that these children suffer, worsen their presentation at school, and make life for the child and the school a great deal harder. So there is a need to be watchful for these kind of behaviours, because once they start to build and once they take hold, they can be very, very difficult to stop. If an alienating, controlling parent sees that their attempts to undermine the school are initially successful, the chances are that the strategies that they use and their attempted involvement of the school to continue these behaviours will become a long-term problem and make life very much harder for the children. And it's very difficult to see which parents are saying things because they are genuinely concerned and which parents are not. But you'll have overt and covert conversations with school reception staff, other teachers in the playground who become friendly with parents. And one of the key areas that we see is that controlling parents attempt to persuade the administrative school or the head teachers to prevent the interaction and the engagement of the targeted parent with school events, especially school choir events, school sports days, this sort of thing. They'll try and manipulate the school into believing that for instance, if they're going through a court process, an alienating parent might say that the other parent is not allowed to attend any of these events or parents' evenings because it doesn't say so on the court order. Well, in fact, court orders work the other way. They only prohibit or stop anybody from doing something. So if those specific measures have not been reflected on a court order that's shown to you, then that's for them to say that they're not allowed to do something because it's not a court order, that's a misrepresentation of the legal process, and it's a common way that we see where schools are manipulated by controlling parents. Another, what we call a classic trick that is sometimes played by alienating parents is where they coerce a child to make allegations against the targeted parent which could be made outside of school, and the alienated parent could themselves directly contact the local social services. What happens instead is that the child makes these allegations at school. The school then has a duty to inform the local social services, and if the allegations are severe enough, automatically there's a Section 47 investigation kicks in, and it seems to have far more valence because it comes from the school rather than comes from the alienating parent directly. The alienating parent may already have a track record with the social services where this kind of thing has happened before and the allegations have been dismissed. So there could be any one of a number or a series of Section 47 investigations in the past. But we find that the ones that are actually initiated from a report from a school where a child has been placed into the school, made the allegations, and the school has then gone further with it, they are the ones where often the social services will instruct or advise the alienating parent to stop all contact with the targeted parent for a specific period of time whilst the allegations are investigated. And the allegations, obviously, because they're made at school, they involve processes at schools as well. And because these allegations in many cases are not true, the child has been manipulated, coerced to make them at school, it can ruin the child's perception of the school as a neutral environment, because the child sees the school as a collaborator in them now not seeing their targeted parent for X amount of weeks. So one of the key things that schools can do is to ensure that they themselves as an institution maintain a positive, active relationship with the other parent, with the targeted parent. These parents often disengage at some stage during this process, whether it be legal process or not, and very much of their decision making about whether they remain engaged with their children will rely upon whether professionals are triangulated into a campaign against them and whether professionals actively engage in isolating their children from them. It is an extreme stressor for a targeted parent to be isolated from their own children for no good reason whatsoever, with the help of the instruments of state, such as schools, courts, social services, and other agencies through which the children move. So I would advise any school to maintain, without any compromise, as far as possible, a neutral environment where they are involved with both parents in the absence of actual findings and proven abuse or evidence that the targeted parent should not be near the child. And sometimes this may actually involve taking an active role, because many targeted parents simply, after experience with some child services where they have been ostracised, they may have the impression that all services will ostracise them. So if there are school events, I would suggest it would be a good move, if you have the address or whatnot of the other parent, to invite them to school events. It may mean that you have to keep the two parents separate at the events. You might have to monitor the degree of stress that it could induce in a child in having both parents, and also monitor for any controlling behaviour by either one of the parents, attempts to control it within this kind of environment where there are school events, because that can obviously be very stressful for the children as well. It could mean some interaction with the children beforehand, so as to tell the children that the school is a completely neutral place, daddy will be on one side, mummy's on the other, they're not going to talk to each other, you can carry on as you would normally do. So it's very important for schools not to be persuaded by parents who are using controlling strategies to try and isolate another parent from the child's life. Now, these kind of parents can be extremely persuasive. They can be quite obstructive, rude, obnoxious when they don't get their way, but I would suggest that you don't take the easy route, don't try and get an easy life for yourselves by simply aligning with one parent against the other, that you maintain that neutrality, be robust, and I'd suggest that you be there for both of the parents, because if you're there for both of the parents, you are there for the whole of the child. One of the best things that schools are able to do is actually facilitate parenting time for the ostracised parent. It's a safe environment, it's an environment where many children are quite accustomed to seeing both of their parents until one of these trigger points arrives in their lives, and children may be quite happy to see the ostracised parent at the school. It would also reinforce to the children that the school is actually a neutral place. So rather than the psychologically controlling effects of one parent following the child all day at school, by being neutral and by allowing a targeted parent in to have contact, where you actually take a child out of a class and give them some time with the targeted parent and do it proactively without court orders, obviously without disrupting the child's education too much. But you'll find that in some of the schools that have done this, alienating parents can sometimes give up, because if they can't compromise the environments in which the children move when they're not in the family home, they simply don't have the ability to isolate the children to the degree that is necessary to fully manipulate, fully alienate them, or fully induce delusional disorders and brainwashing into the children. So it would be a protective factor for the school where the targeted parent is safe to facilitate as much time, as much involvement with the child and the targeted parent at school. Now you may find that certainly later on in the timelines where social services can get involved, one of the attempts, one of the supposed resolutions that the social services try to bring in is counselling and therapeutic services for the child. There's a problem here because really there's nothing wrong with the child. Children are reacting quite naturally and normally and as can be expected to the circumstances that are being imposed upon them. So it's not necessarily the children who need the intervention, it's the parents who need the intervention. Now when I say parents, there's an S on the end of parents, but it's not, in these kind of scenarios, it's not parents, it's one parent acting in ways which are designed to ostracize the other parent, and those behaviours are seen, noted and felt very deeply by the child and have an effect on the child. So the real therapy that children need is for both of their parents to support a proper parenting plan between them that satisfies the child's attachment needs. And if there's a secure attachment to both parents, which is more or less equal, then obviously you would expect to see a parenting plan that reflects an equal enough division of time between the two parents. And where you don't get that, you're likely to see the problems manifest in children where their attachment systems are disrupted. So attachment systems are still likely to be disrupted, even in cases where a child is seeing the other parent, but not having enough time with them to satisfy the degree of disruption that they're feeling at the separation. So sometimes the social services will suggest that the child goes through counselling or therapeutic services and that these services are administered at school. So the problem there is that if these interventionists are not trained in what's called family systems, which is the psychological division under which the best research has been done for children going through these particular problems, if the counsellors and therapists are not trained in this particular type of assessment and intervention, there is a possibility that they can actually do more harm. The traditional one-on-one therapy with children of this type really doesn't work. Even if you identify what the problem is and try to help the children, whatever good is done in therapy tends to be undone when the children go back to the psychologically controlling parent. So you need to be very careful that the type of counselling and therapy that is undertaken by or is recommended by social services to be done in schools for children who may be having these kind of problems, we must ensure that that kind of therapy is exactly the right one and that the therapist is trained in family systems. So again, just to summarise, from what we've seen, there are 4 types of behaviours and scenarios that we can get from school in response to these type of events when once they start to kick off, where the psychological manipulation of children by one parent against another parent start to manifest within the school environment. So the first one is that the school become active collaborators and facilitators of the alienation process. That may be more the case where the controlling parent has managed to get themselves a position of influence on the board of governors. The second type of school is where they actively promote the alienation without realising that what they're doing is actually wrong, without realising what they're doing is against the child's best interests, where they have become triangulated innocently and they believe perhaps the allegations against the other parent, they believe some of the adverse expressions that children come up with against a targeted parent, where they haven't seen any positive interaction between a child and a targeted parent, because perhaps a targeted parent no longer comes to the school or is no longer feels welcome. So you get the deliberate and you get the naive facilitators of alienation within the school population. You get a third type where the school staff, even right up to headmistress level, head teacher level, may not realise that there are things that they can do to assist the child. They may not agree with the alienating parent strategies, and they may be quite aware of what is actually going on. They may be very well informed about parental alienation, but they feel helpless. Schools have only got limited resources, and these children can burn up an inordinate amount of resources. It's additional interactions with parents, both parents, additional interactions with social services, therapeutic services, with those particular children, and where some of these children are concerned, they do start to manifest with some very disruptive behaviours. Some of them are diagnosed, which brings its own problems, and some of them are misdiagnosed and actually put into classes where it's believed they've got ADHD or autism, because the symptoms, the symptom set is pretty much the same. So the amount of administration that these children can cause can be quite high for a busy school. A busy school with 1,000 kids or so is now overly focused on what could be a very small, many resources and a lot of time now being spent on what could be a small sample of the school. It's very disruptive to teachers' time and very disruptive to the running of the school and taking the school away from their core educational purpose. And the fourth type of the school that I would suggest is to be as child-focused as possible from the beginning, where perhaps even preventative measures and awareness courses are run within the school, and proactive literature sent out to parents that the following will not be accepted for our population of children is unacceptable behaviour from parents. So try to nip it in the bud before it even starts. Make it very clear to potential psychological controllers, and you never know who they may be, because the most sane, nicest person can turn into a complete monster of a parent and engage in these kind of behaviours where their triggers and where their buttons are pressed. We're all vulnerable to moving along the scale one way or the other, and you really never know which kind of parent is going to be or when this could happen. And where